Ok, velkommen til en episode av Skravleklassen fra Zoom igjen, på grunn av virussituasjonen blant annet, og spesielt nå kanskje på grunn av et nytt virus, eller en ny virusvariant som heter Omicron, og derfor jeg er så spent på denne samtalen, fordi vi har med oss en person fra nettopp Sør-Afrika, hvor denne varianten ble oppdaget. Det er viktig å presisere, ikke nødvendigvis hvor den stammer fra. So welcome Zoe Gill from Johannesburg. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I just told the audience in Norwegian that I'm excited to talk to someone from South Africa because the new strain of the COVID virus was detected there, but maybe not originated there. We don't know yet. So Zoe, please introduce yourself. What should I do?
So I recently completed my PhD this year. I work in bioinformatics, and specifically genomics, which I'm sorry about that, which until recently...
It's a third world.
Yeah, exactly. So I work in genomics, so most people in South Africa don't know the first thing about the genome. So it's quite a niche here. I'm very interested in evolution. I did my master's actually in evolutionary genetics. And I'm very interested in public health. I've been involved in quite a few public health African projects, mostly to do with genetics. Yeah, that's me.
Cool. And you're a friend of my friend Jenna, who some might remember from different cool bars in Oslo when she worked there. She was quite a popular girl.
Yeah.
So firstly, sorry. Jeg kan ikke ha det her nå, Nicholas. Maya? It's my nephew. Oh my God. We just have to edit that out. This is the third time that happened. Sorry about that. So, it's not every day we read about South Africa in Norwegian newspapers. It's mostly if it's some new lead in the Olof Palme murder, where it's breaking news about some South African right-wing assassins, or anything related to Mandela.
Right.
Like when the clerk died 3 weeks ago, the Nobel Prize winner from the Norwegian Nobel Prize Committee, War Crimes Incorporated. No, I'm just kidding. But we're not going to talk about that because suddenly South Africa is in the news again. Or not again, but at all. And it's, of course, something negative. As always, about Africa, it seems. Mm-hmm. It's the Omicron virus. The following travel bans, which the Norwegian Prime Minister have also inflicted upon you, and it has caused an outrage. So let's just start with a really simple question. What is this Omicron strain?
So Omicron is a variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it has a highly mutated spike protein. So I think there's some of 30 mutations in the spike protein, and it seems to be quite transmissible. The data is showing that it's about 3 to 4 times more transmissible than the previous variant that we had, Delta. And it's not, I guess people had hoped it would be contained. It's the kind of the dominant variant here in South Africa, or specifically in Gauteng, where I'm based. And
it's Greek to me, literally Greek, because it's from the Greek alphabet. I don't know anything about these proteins or... and I suspect that many people with strong opinions, as myself, know very little about science. But people know a lot about emotions, and especially their own emotions. And supposedly or obviously the emotions of many Western European politicians was to shut down South Africa and 6 or 7 other countries in the South African region, including Mozambique. And so I do want to hear everything about spike proteins, even though I don't understand anything anyway, as I suspect most people who engage in this does not either. But I also want to hear, what did you feel, you personally, and the people around you, society, when you heard that we were restricting all travel from and to your countries?
It does feel like, I mean, there's two brains. There's like the science aspect, and then there's just how I feel, which I think you're asking me about. And how it feels is it feels like being kicked when you're down, because our economy has taken so many hits. It just feels like this was an impossible additional hit. And I actually, I was studying for a long time, and I worked in the service industry for 11 years while I was studying. And just understanding how much our economy relies on money and people to come visit and things like that. I think people were holding on to this festive season, like the film industry, the service industry, a lot of our core industries was holding on for December to bring in some money so that they didn't close, So that just felt like an impossible hurdle, basically. So that's how it felt.
Yeah, and the reactions in newspapers and in the media were...
I think very soon after it was announced, I started seeing a lot of misinformation. So I think it was very easy for people to, specifically on social media, and then obviously perpetuated in the greater sort of media, was to kind of get angry, to get angry and say, well, it was found here, it's not from here, and like we shouldn't have travel bans because variants arise everywhere. And the reason that we saw it for the first, the reason we were one of the first countries to see it is because we have this amazing genomics infrastructure because of HIV and TB. And so obviously I felt quite, my reaction to that was kind of frustration, because I just felt like the general message, even amongst scientists, so people who I've studied with, they were sharing some of these posts, and I knew it was not the truth, based on some other connections and knowing how these things work, which most people wouldn't have to know how these kinds of decisions get made. So yeah, that was very frustrating. I think there was this one post which I really hate, that it was made in August on LinkedIn by a business motivational speaker. And it basically was like this kind of inflammatory post. There was no date attached to it, and was actually in reference to the Delta strains. It wasn't even applicable. And that thing did the rounds, hundreds of thousands of shares. And it basically was like, this variant is in and listed all these countries. And so many people were confused. And I saw people with PhDs also sharing this thing, it's everywhere. Why are we getting banned? And I just followed the post, found the original post on LinkedIn, and try to post that to my Instagram to try sort of divert some of this misinformation. But it was a very difficult few days, I'd say, following that.
Sorry. One of the strange things about this travel ban restriction is that it went against the WHO's recommendations. and that's not totally new. We have had some contradictions before between the national agencies and the World Health Organization, but it was, in this context, it was quite surprising. And I don't think the arguments from the WHO were pretty. I guess they were clear from the start, but they weren't relayed via our media. I couldn't grasp the arguments for not listening to the WHO. And I read an article about Joe Biden's statements where he said now, in regards to Omicron, we need to fight this new variant with science and speed, not chaos and confusion. And some South African experts has said that the only one who's used science and speed is actually South Africa, and the rest of the world has reacted with exactly chaos and confusion. And also that you have been duly punished for being vigilant and informative and honest. And now you're being punished because Western and European politicians do want to show their public that they are steadfast and swift to react. And it's a lot of symbolism, some people say. Would you agree with that? Comment on that?
I'll comment on it. I mean, there's too many parts to agree blanket.
Okay.
And I think there's many things here. So I think
sorry, maybe it was too complex a question.
No, I think there's a lot of things at play here. I think that I don't think necessarily that we weren't exceptionally vigilant. I don't think we were vigilant compared to maybe the rest of the continent, but in terms of like the actual events that played out was that there was a person who, I don't know if I should give this context, but this is kind of like why I have my thoughts. But basically, there was a positive case in Hong Kong, and that was sequenced and that was uploaded onto GIS. I don't even know how to say it. I just read it all the time. GZ or GZ or whatever. It's a genome sort of repository for people to upload their genomes as COVID genomes as they come in. And a scientist in the UK had looked at the sequence and realized how mutated the spike protein was and actually posted it. And that was the Tuesday before the announcement. So following that, we uploaded sequences and the cat was already out the bag in terms of the scientific community. So although Sahari, the bird, I'm sorry. In terms of being swift, we were kind of just following protocol. It does make countries like South Africa, I think, it does feel like a punishment of sorts, just for being transparent. But like in terms of response, I think we were just following protocol. We just found we had actually, had been looking at it for a couple of days leading up to it. And so I think it is important. It's a variant of concern because people weren't sure about how the vaccine was going to work in conjunction with this new strain. So the reason why I think a lot of people freaked out was it was the first kind of variant that arose where people were questioning whether or not the vaccine would will be efficient in covering this particular variant. So I think, to answer your question, sorry, I did a very roundabout route. Maybe I should re-answer and you can edit this out. But I think we weren't as swift and as people are thinking. We did take a few days and we did, We did do standard protocol, which is good, right? But at the same time, I don't agree economically with cutting off a country off. But I think it was scary, and people were trying to actually just contain the spread of this variant until we knew more. So it's a difficult one.
But from a game theoretical viewpoint, let me try a thought experiment. Country in the third world or whatever, maybe not regard South Africa as a third world exactly, but the country outside Western Europe and the United States detect something, a strain or something, and they follow protocol, as you say, maybe not swift enough, but at least transparent, and they get travel ban restrictions, which is in effect economic sanctions. A lot of money at stake. It's people's lives, their livelihoods. It can fuel political tension in a country where there are a lot of problems already, which we can come back to. From a strictly game theoretic perspective, in public health, seen through a public health lens, couldn't this kind of work as a disincentive for the next country who detects a different strain, potential dangerous strain, from being transparent in fear of getting restrictions imposed on them or travel bans, which will in turn lead to economic, if not catastrophe, at least hardship?
Yeah, it will. I think, but it's a particularly difficult question. I don't think there's because it will 100% incentivize people to keep these things under wraps, because had we not said anything, within weeks, this would have spread everywhere. And then, it would have been more difficult to track where it came from. Not entirely impossible, I suppose, but it would have been very difficult, there would have been no need to really cut off South Africa. So yeah, and I do think that would have been fairly easy for us to do. And it is encouraging, I guess, the next country to do that. And variants very well will keep arising, because biology always does what biology does. Viruses try and improve. And I agree. But it's a tricky one, because it's too early to tell now. There has been some preliminary information, but say this variant, it's mathematically, people have calculated to be about 3 to 4 times more transmissible than the previous variant. Say that it's just as lethal as the previous variant, and vaccine coverage doesn't stop severe COVID, which all of that is a highly likely scenario given the spike protein. Do you then ethically just let that run rampant in the world? Who knows? Do you millions of more deaths? That's
that's an argument for the restrictions being imposed in good faith. You think
I think it's just the alternative for how do we handle new variants, and that should have been we should have had a global conversation, I guess, about this. I think that the way it was handled was so swift, and there was no real room for conversation about what the ethical conundrum that this provides. It's a chatty. I don't know. I'm really hoping that, because a lot of viruses do mutate into sort of less severe versions of themselves, I really hope that this is just a more transmissible and less lethal variant.
But regardless, don't you see it as problematic that it's not more coherent, the messages from the World Health Organizations and from politicians in the Western countries? Can you see that this itself can be problematic, that this kind of a, if you call it doublespeak, even though they're not synchronized fully, they maybe should be, because it can fuel some more tension because people say WHO says this, but the politician in my country said this, and it just can fuel more tension and more divide in a already completely messed up public discourse, especially regarding these virus situations and restrictions. Isn't that also a danger in itself, that we hear two messages from two authorities?
I think that for the first time in sort of like modern history, I guess we have to, it's a very unique scenario where we all are on the whole planet facing the same virus. And so I think we've never had to work together. And the World Health Organization has never had to play this role. And I think it's confusing for everybody. So like, how much do we need to abide by the World Health Organization's rules? Like, is there any sort of ramifications if a country doesn't abide by those rules? The only time that we've really had to face like understanding how we're going to interact with an organization like WHO is now, because we all have to join together on this like global pandemic. And it's also, it's a longitudinal relationship. It's not just a acute scenario. It's like we are interacting until this virus and this pandemic runs its course. And, so I think that it is very confusing getting multiple messages. But at the same time, I understand that as an entire globe, this is an entirely new scenario. Like basically, how much power is the World Health Organization assigned in this scenario? Like, is that clear to everybody?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you come from you attack this from your scientific background. I only have I cannot almost even say a media background, but that's the lens which I see this through. And so maybe my questions are a bit skewed in that direction. So just push back if it's if I miss the mark. But already it's a lot of antagonism towards these global authorities like the WHO, and people say like, we don't trust the government, and the government answers, but this is WHO's recommendations, to trust them at least. And some people say, okay, we trust these, and some other people say, no, we trust those even less because they're even more, the drill. But now that the national governments of different countries, especially the West, and these bigger institutions like WHO starts to say different things, I fear that it's even easier to dismiss it, because you can say, we don't trust the government. They don't even listen to the WHO anymore. So why can't we trust them? We don't trust either of them because they don't agree on anything. They didn't agree on masks in March 2020, and Fauci didn't. All these, and if I understood you correctly, you said that this has not only, what did you say, longitudinal.
Longitudinal. It's not just of interaction. It's like,
I understand. If I think I understand you correctly, you are in agreement with me in the way that I see this as, it's not just this pandemic. It's also the next pandemic. It's not just pandemics. Even it's other big global crises may come. We have a term called Turnkey Totalitarianism. It's concept made up by this Swedish-American philosopher named Nick Bostrom who says basically if you don't want Stalin to have some political authority, you don't give it to anyone, even though your current prime minister is the nicest guy ever, because he may be Stalin tomorrow, or he may be toppled and Stalin may take his place. So if you give extraordinary powers to some benevolent ruler, tomorrow he may be assassinated and some dictator has the same tools in his political arsenal, and it can be used against the population. But further than that, I would say you can put this in many other contexts. Like everything we do now is kind of turnkey, if you understand what I mean. Like if we start saying that we can pose travel bans on countries that do this and that, we can do 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, there are totally other situations, new pandemics or other types of crises like drought or famine or immigration or war or whatever. And we have all these new political methods or all these new tools that politicians can use and have used with great effect, either as symbolic politic or as very effective policy in the context of that one country or whatever. And do you see the danger that all these new tools, let's use that term, can be used for bad purposes if we are too obsessed with what's happening just here and now? We have to stop the pandemic. Of course, you have to stop the pandemic, but everything has a cost and everything has a limit. Like you wouldn't, let's say, let's cure cancer. Okay, we kill all people in the world and we cure cancer. That's the extreme example. We wouldn't go that far, but we wouldn't to stop the spreading of HIV. We could lock up everyone who are poor, or everyone who, we can do extreme things to stop. We can make people drive 5 kilometers an hour. And
it's interesting that you say locking up. It's interesting that you say locking up poor people, because the association with HIV is that it's poor people, which is. No,
I mean it would be effective if we killed all pedophiles. We would maybe stop. If we killed all victims of abuse, we could stop or mitigate very strongly pedophilia because it's inherited and all these kinds of arguments. Much more not inflammatory example is we could make everyone drive 5 kilometers an hour and that's it. The economy will collapse, but people wouldn't be killed in traffic. I mean, do you understand my...
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're like, to what degree is the intervention almost worth the cause, right? Like, because the interventions you are supplying are quite radical, and to what degree does it become more of a problem than the actual problem you're trying to address? The problem with a pandemic is, to some degree, you have to work together to save lives. But at the same time, I don't agree with, as you say, these sort of tools becoming commonplace so that in the future they get used again. I think you're right in saying that it would stop, maybe in this instance, stop the spread to put a travel ban, but to what end? Like that. I did have a point, but I can't remember. I got lost in all your examples.
I'm sorry. It's typical me. I
just had a point. I think I'm just writing them down as they come into my brain.
I get carried away.
Yeah, but it was a good point. Can't remember it now.
It's because my English is not perfect, so I'm looking for the words, and then my brain.
I have a very good friend from Norway, and I'm kind of used to the way he speaks, which is very similar. So don't worry about it. What was the point I had?
Maybe I can lead you back to it by asking a much simpler question.
Yes, I have a point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think what's coming out more and more is who's an expert, right? So that's for me that's sort of like a ethical, philosophical problems, like who gets to make decisions about. Like take the pandemic for an example. Like, is it the doctors? Is it the scientists? Is it the epidemiologists? Do they work together? Because a lot of people have very different views. Who makes the answers? Who sets the mandate? World Health Organization is just a bunch of scientists and epidemiologists and doctors. It's just another group. So it's very difficult. And then can't remember what you said, but it's like, it's the mistrust between when you have two different messages, I think that's just happening on multiple scales with lots of individuals, because they start seeing discrepancies between this person and this body, or they'll see some video on Facebook and it's some doctor with some title, but what that doctor is saying is completely wrong, but they won't know that because now that's the expert. And then if they have this dissonance for enough amount of time, for long enough of time, it creates this feeling that maybe I must just go with my gut. And, so I think this idea of an expert is an interesting one. Obviously, I'm pretty biased in terms of who I listen to, but that's taken 11 years of studying.
Yeah, I don't know if I heard about the guy called Kingsworth.
No.
His first name, I just have to check. I just saw an interesting interview with him. Yeah, and I think it's Paul, but whatever. He's some kind of a philosopher of sorts. Like everyone is a journalist, politician, health official, and philosopher nowadays, only with a Twitter account. And that's, I say it in a humoristic manner, but I think it's a bit serious. I think before the pandemic, I was irritated. This maybe not strong enough word. I was like, it's wary of everyone becoming a journalist and a politician with their Twitter accounts. But with the pandemic, it's gonna layer up. Like everyone's a scientist, and everyone is suddenly.
And everyone's not a scientist, unfortunately.
Yeah, and people throw facts at each other, and it's so. The material is so complex, and if you're going to engage in this debate, you have to, like, if you just compare it with the debate about racism or other issues that are complex enough, but like not complex on this level, like with
and
genomes and proteins.
Yeah, people expect you to, as a scientist, package these things so that they can understand. And sometimes it's just too much context. Like, I'm not going to expect to understand, physics and be able to comment on physics. I mean, obviously I've done like first year physics at university, but like, I'm not going to be able to comment on the black hole, for instance, if I see an image or whatever. Like, I'm not going to be able to know enough from a Google search or multiple Google searches, or even a scientist explaining it in like a 10-minute conversation to understand or make predictions. Or, I'm seeing a lot of people trying to make predictions about these things and make connections between facts. But like, you can't, these things are complicated. They really are. I mean, it's not, we're dealing with, for instance, the genetics or the genomics of it. We're dealing with complex technology. We're dealing with a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. Generally, when you get My cat. Generally, 1 second.
My cat also is a big problem here. My dog and my cat.
My cat's just my shadow. So, basically it's just complicated. I mean, I'm chatting to people about sort of we have a thing called the Phylogenetic Tree, and it basically is a visualization of evolutionary changes, and you basically can visualize common ancestors and like distance from original variants and stuff. Explaining that's going to be way too complicated, and a lot of information lies in that complexity. So while that then leads on to the question of what then certain people have to dictate all the information to other people, and set the rules because most people don't understand. It's also a problem. So I don't know.
I think especially the combination of social media and a global pandemic is quite unique and troubling because we've been touching upon it like everyone's an expert and they're throwing numbers at each other, and it's so many biases in play here. People don't want to admit they're wrong, people don't want to admit they're stupid, and people do want to be informed. I mean, you wouldn't sit at the cafe table with a friend or an acquaintance and quote like several genomic codes and numbers like people do on Twitter. It's totally it's no coherence between how people communicate in real life and how people communicate online. It's like it's like two different languages, and
I do think that. Sorry, I'm just jumping in.
No, jump in.
It's just when I have a thought, I'm like, it's going to go away. I think that, as you were saying, once someone posts something, it becomes their stance, part of their personal brand, right? So I was seeing that one day. I was seeing my whole feed on Instagram, people reposting this idea about us having this world-class genomics capabilities, and we found this variant here, but it's not necessarily from here. So I saw all these people posting it. Then the next day, I'd see more, and I decided to make my own post about it just to, share my thoughts, and did not. So like maybe 100 people responded to be like, this is really helpful, but so few posted because I think no one wants to be seen as wrong. So if you've now posted something the one day, you can't post something that contradicts it the next day because there's this culture where you can't show it to be wrong. So that's also a damaging way for information to flow because people are associating like almost social capital is attached to their share history. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a new kind of class distinction somehow. It's like a marker. Who you are is, I should say, part of your brand. But another person commented on, I think maybe it was the same person. I'm not totally sure, but it doesn't matter because his point is good anyway. And that's also a thing I think we should think more about. Like, if the point is good, it's not that important who said it always. I think if people attach too much weight sometimes to names and titles and stuff. And we should start to go back to like, if the idea or the argument is good, it doesn't matter who said it. But that was not my point. My point was this guy, I think it was the same guy, he proposed the idea that many people, firstly, this has become one other layer of what he calls the culture war, where it's like two sides. You can see it, for instance, in America, like wearing a mask or not wearing a mask is like a right-wing issue. It's totally absurd. my view. And many aspects with this pandemic is also enmeshed in this culture war, call it whatever you want. But he had a point. He said, like, people on the one side of the culture war, let's say, like the people who are calling out conspiracy theories and fake news, like the blue side, what you want to call it, they're always or often invoking authorities and what they say and what comes from the public sources or the Wikipedia sources or the commonly understood authorities. But he had a good point. He said, like, in light of what we know now about how social media and all this information overflow disrupts our brain at a really reptile level almost, it does also affect top politicians and top scientists. They're also affected by this. They're not immune to information overload and all these different platforms they have to deal with all the time. It's not like we normal people, we are really disturbed by a phone ringing all the time or Facebook making noise all the time or thousands of different news coming at us all the time. The people who are actually supposed to...
most...
the world is... Scientists, top politicians, they're also affected by this, don't you think?
I mean, most scientists that... I guess I can't speak from all scientists, but I know I get my sources usually from, like, if I'm going to speak about something or claim to know something, I generally go to the source. So whether it be a journal article or, like, for instance, GZAID, where the genomes are getting uploaded, that is the source. Like, I'm not getting my news from nobody. Like, I'm not looking at headlines. I'm not, you know what I mean? I engage with discourse with people on social media, but I never get my sources from social media. I'm always quite interested to see, like, maybe someone's made a graph from data that they found. You know, I don't have enough time to always go and look at the data, but I'm genuinely not going to perpetuate that information because I haven't vetted it myself. So I think not everybody has that level of rigor in terms of making sure that they are sure of what they're reading. But I guess, people maybe lean too hard on the information sources from social media.
But don't you, as a scientist, also get stressed out by? Do you feel immune from all kind of noise from several different sources, or do you say you're able to stay rigorous and yeah?
I only just got back onto Twitter this week. So I don't, and that's my sort of first attempt at engaging about this kind of work on social media. I keep my social media usually just to be my friends and things outside of my profession. And I keep up to date online was just a lot of reading of articles, journal articles, not articles published by journalists, but like published in scientific journals. Sounds really nerdy, but I think that that's the way you do it. Like, that's the way I do it, to be honest. This is a new journey into science Twitter for me. I think the last time I was on there was first year masters, posting a lot of jokes. Now it's all science. So we'll see how that goes. But for the most part, social media is generally just my social network. And I don't get too distracted in terms of science on social media. But I have been enjoying, the past week, I have been enjoying connecting with the global community. That has been
I may be hammering in this point. We will move on to other important things. But I just wanted, lastly, in this vein, since Carl Sagan and much before that, we always hear from these top scientists or on TV, like people should be more interested in science, and we want people to be interested in. And now everyone is discussing science every day, all the time, everywhere. As a scientist, let's say whatever Carl Sagan's hopes for a future, or Neil deGrasse Tyson's hopes from 5 years ago, like people should be more engaged in science, and now everyone's talking about it. As a scientist yourself, do you find it inspiring and a good thing that everyone's engaged 24/7 in science, or can you see, this is a leading question for sure, but can you see also some possible pitfalls?
I mean, it's nice because my parents are a bit more interested in what I do for the first time. But I don't.
It started World War III, but my parents talks more to me about interesting stuff. I'm just kidding.
Well, before I think they were like, oh, she does. I don't think they knew what I did. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think that everybody, for me, I think the big distinction is I think that science is often a method more than a interest area, which is a very Ponzi way of saying, I think at the core of science, it's an approach. You do have your areas of expertise. There's a lot of stuff you need to learn if you want to be very good in a specific niche. But I think often what sets people who've had to practice science for a long time apart from people who almost just have science as a hobby is that it is a certain level of discerning. You can discern information and you're looking for stuff. But I think for the most part, I think it's good. Actually, yeah, I think it's good that everybody is interested in science. That doesn't make everyone a scientist. That doesn't mean you have to listen to people's opinion. I think that's the clear distinction. But I think that overall, we can't lose anything from people being interested in science. And I think maybe you might be gaining something. I just think that you can't be trusting your own. If you're not an expert in an area, I would advise that you don't take your own opinion about something. I think that's the problem. Yeah,
I just remind the whole thing reminds me of this scene in the series about the Unabomber terrorizing the United States with these mail bombs, and FBI in desperation asked the public for help, and just crashed the whole investigation because they got 1 million tips from cuckoos and nuts everywhere from all across the United States, and they had to go every lead, every tip they had to kind of, to a certain extent, look up and see if there was anything. It just jammed the whole investigation. And this seems like the Unabomber case on a global scale. I don't know if anyone asked us to do this, but it seems like some godlike voice or something said okay, everybody go do your research. Let's try to solve this problem together. And 5 minutes later, God was like, oh, no, I should never have done that. No. This internet is flooded with opinions and theories. And the real good theories is just drowning in nonsense. That's how, for me as a layperson, you say I couldn't tell if you were a serious scientist by your LinkedIn profile or your Twitter handle, because I don't have even the tools to detect who's a real scientist. I think I share that bad trait with many people. That's a problem in itself, that I can't distinguish one serious scientist from another.
Yeah, I think that is a point. When I went back onto Twitter last week, I started first by following people I knew from real life, and then seeing people they interacted with, and from reading certain people's posts, I immediately knew like this seems like a legitimate scientist based on like how they're reporting, the kinds of things they're looking at, the way they're presenting the findings. I was like, okay, cool, I'll follow that. But like that takes time. That takes an understanding of, you know, it's not so simple to distinguish a believable scientist online. It's true.
And another question, I think it was one of these philosophers I talked to post is like, is there a point in this discourse about the pandemic where we should ask ourselves, okay, of course, the scientists have an important role in this whole thing, but at one point we maybe should stop and ask, is it actually a political question more than a scientific one? How to react to this pandemic on a global scale? Even a philosophical question? Should we like take a step backwards and like let scientists do their job, and they have to find cures and vaccines and everything? But how to deal with a huge thing such as this, with all its implications, like travel bans, potential racism that can come, political rivalry, as it's a million components. It's a limit to what scientists as a group can answer. It's a limit to how many of these questions scientists can answer, like how to deal with this pandemic. It's other fields like philosophy, politics, like historians maybe also should be more in the debate. If you understand one of more of my convoluted questions, do you see the point?
Yeah, I think there should be. Yeah, I think there should be many people involved in making these decisions, but unfortunately, who decides? Do we have to reach a consensus? And I think pandemic it requires time as a very precious resource in a pandemic, because as we all know from now, everybody has a basic understanding of epidemiology. In the sort of exponential phase of a pandemic, you know, that graph that goes up, starts just a few cases and just rapidly exponentially increases the number of cases. There's certain time intervals where we need to make swift decisions. And so maybe having a big group of disparate disciplines coming together, you're not going to reach a consensus in the time that it takes and the time that it's required for you to make a decision. So I think that while I agree with your statement, it's not just the scientists. We shouldn't be making these decisions about sort of actions that affect people and countries. I think that maybe these things are things that need to be decided now, like, or not now, but like in the lulls of the pandemic, in the periods where in between, you know, in between the resurgence of variants, you know, we need to then sit for those months and try to figure out how we're going to approach it in the future. But it's very difficult to do that in the moment, I think.
Let's say say we have a god or a perfect machine with perfect information, and the bits of the machine were just scattered around. And if they were able to talk to each other, like the fields of science and all those other fields, we will see the whole picture. And I don't know if this is true, but let's say 1,000 scientists say that this is very, very dangerous. We have to deal with this in this way. If not, it's going to be a catastrophe because people are going to die and whatever. But we have economists on the other side said that you may post this argument and you may be right in that, but we see it from a different angle. We see it from a global economic angle. And if we do as you say, even though we save 10,000 lives or 1 million lives, you don't see our side of the picture, which is the world economy. And if we do as you say, we save 1 million lives, but the economy will crash and 10 million.
Who decides in the end? The economist or the scientist? Who makes the decision? Who represents that body that then makes the decision?
I think that is the discussion we have to have.
So it's like, so you're saying that, and then to come to that agreement, it will take time. So I agree that we need to have these conversations, and people need to be in the room, but you need to give it time, and you can't be doing that during the pandemic. You got to be doing in the part of the pandemic where you need to be making the decisions. Those are things that need to be brought in so that you have like a set of guides that when you do have to make decisions in the moment, there is a philosophy and there is like some sort of assistance with this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. The only thing that doesn't make sense is that I don't have more battery. Was very unprofessional, but my computer was about to. Okay, so a few more questions about the north, south, western world and Africa and all these things, because I'm conscious about your time also here. But let me try to take another parallel. When it's an opioid epidemic in America right now, and some people have argued that since this has also hit white people and middle class people a lot, it's much more on the agenda than, say, the crack epidemic that almost only hit black people in the 80s. Now it's suddenly very urgent. Some people say because it's white middle class people also. I don't know if that's true, but it's a theory. So with that example,
I mean, I've looked into that. I followed this whole thing very closely, actually, both the crack and the opioid epidemic. Crack was a pandemic with they were white people, but not a single white person was it had jail time for possession. It was incredibly racist the way it was handled, and even the way it was portrayed in the media, like crack babies were a problem with black women. So sorry, I interrupted you because
no, it doesn't matter.
Also one of my passions.
As a scientist or as an enthusiast? I'm just kidding.
I think I part of one of my main core drives, I guess, is sort of health justice. So it's how health is how there are disparities in healthcare, basically. And that, there's lots of things I've looked into, and I think this started with my interest in the AIDS denialist period, and specifically how I related to it because I was a child when it happened, and the information that was shared with me at the time and how I interpreted it versus, what I've researched now and what I understand now about it. I think I'm very interested in how pandemics and sort of disparities in healthcare are portrayed in the media, and how people get away with it, basically, and how people have consistently gotten away with serious human rights violations. in healthcare. So yeah.
Yeah, because my point with the crack versus opioid example is, let's say Africa, we can say that poverty is a pandemic, drought is a pandemic, malaria is a pandemic. We have several things that we can call a pandemic that, since we're a global world with a global economy, it affects everyone. Like, you can list dozens of things happening in Africa or other South America, or Latin America, Asia, that is devastating for people there. Could be called pandemics, not in the strictly scientific sense, but it's widespread problems that affects them a lot, but it also affects everyone else. So why this urgency now? Because it's Corona. Could it be Eurocentric bias of some sort, or am I getting very...
Are you saying why, just to clarify, are you saying why is it a...
I mean, just like take poverty in Africa, like that's a pandemic. It's affecting a huge amount of people who are living in poverty, and that affects the rest of the world because of immigration, because of wars, because of... I mean, why the urgency? Why this extraordinary urgency towards COVID that's not paralleled when we discuss any of these other topics? Like,
I think that poverty here doesn't affect the North as much as COVID would. I think that people are more than happy not more than happy, but it doesn't impact maybe slight immigration. But other than that, there's no real... What happens here doesn't affect people in Europe, except for what's happening with COVID, I guess, or Ebola, or things that can spread rapidly to the north. Yeah, I mean, people do care about themselves.
And it becomes ever so clear when we post travel bans on top of being so immersed in this pandemic that hits us, but not in all the other problems the citizens of the world have. I think one of my concerns regarding this is that one thing is all these things we have talked about, that people are enmeshed in these conversations talking about things they don't know anything about and spend too much time on it, and fake news and everything. But another bigger concern maybe is that there are really, really important things going on in the world every day, like things I listed just now, like malaria, poverty. There are civil wars. I think it's 10 or 12 civil wars in Africa right now. I don't have the exact number. It's the news just pushes all of these things out of the headlines and people's consciousness. I mean, just before the pandemic, it was actually reaching the headlines with this supposedly genocide in Myanmar or Burma, call it whatever. And it's still going on, but it's no room for it in the media because we have to have some room for sports and for some celebrity stuff. And Corona takes up the rest of the space, not only in the news, but in people's heads.
Yeah. But as I mean, one major point I think is, what is the purpose of, if not to help fund, but then, it's also, that's not even a good way for our continent to survive. Like, I don't see, like, what is the point of it even being in the news,
Corona or all the other things?
All the other things.
What's the point of writing about these things in the news?
What's the point of it being in the news?
I mean, that's a really good question. I actually have to think about that because I don't know anymore. But I hope the point about, for instance, writing about poverty and civil war in third world countries is to get people engaged and maybe the opinion will sway politicians to reach out the hand, help out. I don't know. It's maybe very naive, but what's the point of news? Anyway, I mean, I don't read the news because I think it's more toxic to read news than to not read news. That's a personal choice.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I read news when I have to, like interviewing you, I click on the link you send me, but I don't read the newspapers because I feel it's more destructive than constructive. But
so I think you answered your own question.
but I think that's a very snobbish, privileged way of looking at it. I think news has a value. I think it has worth to spread the information about things going on in the world, especially in parts of the world that has bigger problems than us in the West, and for us to read about it and try to do something about it. And I'm afraid that COVID taking all the space in our heads and in the news will make us forget that there are several other problems that we need to solve.
Yeah. I mean, it's not anything I've ever thought about, to be honest.
Start today. No.
I mean, I think about the problems because they're here around me.
What?
I think about the problems because they're currently around me.
And that's what that's my last kind of segment or couple of questions. It's like I live in Norway. I can't imagine how it is to be living in South Africa or in the African continent. But if you try to put it in perspective, in my life, Corona is not the biggest problem. I wouldn't say that, but it's obviously the biggest problem for us as a country. Like if you ask people on the street or read the newspaper, but in South Africa or Africa in general, how would you, if you have to rate like all the problems you have, it's like Corona, is it the same as here in Norway? It's like, it's that number one on the agenda, this is the most pressing issue we have to solve for South Africa to move forwards, or?
No, I think Corona has caused a lot of economical issues in the last week. But I mean, we have 1 in 5 people in South Africa live with HIV. TB is a massive problem. We have multiple drug resistant too. Sorry. We have tuberculosis. We have so much unemployment. It's 25%, but those are people who can work. So then there's like a whole section. There's so many people that are unemployed. It's the worst. I don't know if you know about the Gini coefficient. It's a sort of a metric for measuring wealth disparities. We have the worst in the world. There's housing issues. People live, sanitation issues. We have electricity issues. So our national electricity can't supply the demand. So we have routine, what we call load shedding, where the electricity just cuts out. And that's a huge strain on businesses because they have to come up with expensive alternative solutions.
Wi-Fi issues?
Wi-Fi, that's pretty standard. I mean, there's lots of issues.
Maybe the joke's on us in the West now that in this global village, because of the pandemic, now we really have to take it seriously that people like countries like South Africa and other countries, a group is not better than the weakest link. I don't want to call South Africa the weak link of this world, but if we are a global world that have to come together and solve these problems, we have to make sure that all the countries in the world, because it's a global pandemic, are capable of solving these problems together and then countries need to have electricity and jobs and yeah. We cannot sit in Fortress Europe and just have a lot of money and a lot of security.
But I mean, this is not my, because I have my own views, but this is really not my expertise. I think there's also a problem with sort of Europe coming back in and trying to save us. Like, I think there's much to be said about the minerals that are just being taken from us as well. It's like, it's a very complicated thing that I'm not qualified to speak about, but I definitely have knee-jerk reactions to Europe feeling like they have to come save us again because that didn't work when they came and colonized. And I mean, I'm a product of colonization, but it's a complicated issue.
No, I'm not at all saying that we should come and save you or something like that. I just said, if not all countries have sufficient means to for their governments and their public to work, it's impossible to solve this public problem together. I don't have any ideas about who am I to say anything? But I don't have any ideas about saving another continent or whatever. But something has to be done when the next pandemic arrives.
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise, unfortunately.
I'm not sure if it's anyone's area of expertise how to solve this. Is there any pressing issues about the travel bans, the specific situation with Omicron you want to address lastly?
No, I mean, I'm just hoping in the next week we don't see an increase in vaccinated people in hospitals. That's my main concern. And I think with it seems like the spread of Omicron is not really contained in the rest of the world. So I'm hoping that they lift the travel ban because it's too late. So I'm hoping that happens soon, and that's a swift decision. But yeah, I really am just hoping that that vaccines will work to stop severe COVID. I think it will be absolutely devastating if that's not the case. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe, for taking the time. It was enlightening and interesting to talk with you. Yeah. I hope we will have a better situation soon and I will lift the travel ban.
Yeah, I really hope they lift the travel ban because I don't think it's not containing it. So,
and it's bad for your economic situation.
So bad, yeah, it's so bad for the economy. Yeah. I think it was nice to chat with you, Stella. And yeah. Anything else you would like to? Any other questions? I remember there was but I can't remember if we covered it.
No, I just sorry if I strayed off and talked about things you're not interested in or have expertise in. That's.
It's also difficult to put an opinion to these things. I don't think the rest of the world really understands what it's like, how political it is to live in South Africa. I don't think it's. If you choose to engage with it, you're engaging with politics on a daily basis. It's not like you have to switch off. So as soon as these things sort of come up, I'm not willing to sort of put my name to an opinion.
I registered that it was not you personally, but you was surprising and interesting to see how or to feel how you seem very conscious about not talking about things you do not know too much about necessarily.
Yeah.
And not for that's a good thing. I mean, people shouldn't talk about things they do not know too much about, especially not on a podcast or in the news. But I got the feeling it was like a level deeper than that. It was like, I don't know if it's a cultural difference or...
I think the thing is that I'm very aware of change. And so how I feel about something now might not be how I feel about something in a couple of years' time. And that's not really the case when it comes to a lot of what I'm speaking about in my level, in my area of expertise. I'm happy to put my name to it now or whatever. But like in terms of I feel like I put specifically with politics, I related it's so interlaced with my morals. So it's very difficult to speak about it, I think. And I think this speaking in this podcast is really, it's sort of highlighted a few areas which I think are quite interesting areas when it comes to people in the world relating to knowledge. And I think one is that how do we communicate knowledge? And I think that's a very interesting topic. And then I think the second one is, when it comes to making a decision for a country or the globe, who makes those decisions? And I think those two things for me are quite interesting, just as an aside.
No, I think everything we touched upon is potentially interesting. I want to quote to be just hammering the point of being like a post-colonialist coming in with good intentions to fix your continent and your country. I want to quote one of the famous social anthropologists from Norway, who Thomas Hylland Eriksen, who's been writing a lot about this colonialism in Africa and stuff like that. I'm sure you find him utterly patronizing and irritating, like maybe some things I said also. But he complains about in this current time. I mean, he's said it for 20 years, but it still rings true that we lack the ability to think out loud. And this is get worse and worse because people are self-censoring. They're scared of putting their name on things. I'm not saying this to address it towards you, but I for every podcast I make, especially with people I don't know or from people from other parts of the world, I feel this seems to be getting more and more relevant, that people are scared to think out loud. And maybe I'm contradicting myself a bit here because I'm complaining about everyone's thinking out loud all the time, but that's like more like, I don't know. Yeah, I contradict myself. I understand that because I'm irritated by people talking about things all the time. But
I guess there's different areas where I think it's important to have certain areas in your life where you think out loud. But I think perpetuating knowledge in the world, I'm not sure. I've got to change my language. I have this very, like I say, I think, or I'm not sure. I am sure this is how I feel about it. I think that in certain areas, it's very important to think out loud. But I think it's important to also, if you're going to be engaging with some sort of social media or long-term perpetuation of data or knowledge or whatever, I think it is good to consolidate your thoughts and make sure that what you're saying is something that is adding value in some way and not perpetuating bad information. That's my opinion.
And that's a good opinion. And my opinion is that your thoughts intuitively are worth listening to. So I think you should contemplate more out loud, and I think it will benefit. But that's just an intuition I have based on an hour and a half. Maybe I'm wrong. I have this idea about this kind of a brain drain situation where this different personality types gets more drawn to engaging in the public discourse because of social media mechanics. And these are more like the sociopathic types, the more narcissistic types. And I may be more that kind of person. I don't say I'm a psychopath narcissist, but I'm more on that end of the scale. I'm pretty sure than you. And the brain drain argument, I think there are people like you. I'm scared that on critical mass level gets pushed out of these platforms because they're designed for narcissists and fearmongers and emotive in a negative way people like you who are reasoned, and maybe in this context I would argue a bit too reasoned, or I wouldn't say self-censoring, but too hesitant to say something. You, on the critical mass scale, with all Zoe Gills of the world are just, I don't want to be engaged in this. I don't want to comment on this. Who are we left with discussing important things? Crazy people like me.
No, I think it's a very important point. And I think it really came to the fore this week. And I also realized that I wasn't, I'm always cautious, and I don't put stuff on the internet, aside from memes or whatever. But I think this week I realized that I think in a weird way, I have a responsibility to speak about it. But unfortunately, as you say, then my reach isn't good because I haven't fostered this, reach on social media in this regard. So when I'm now ready to hazard a guess or make a comment about what's happening, I've got 70 Twitter followers or whatever. And I was lucky enough to sort of got something like 14 retweets or whatever, but that was all I was ever going to get on my thing, because I haven't been putting myself out there.
But that's part of the problem. I mean, let's say it's a Venn diagram of people with good ideas and people with the skills needed to get a lot of followers. And you know what the Venn diagram is like?
Yeah, the skills is often just willing to just put out lots of opinions. That is actually just a skill, and those opinions aren't necessarily true, but it doesn't matter. It's just basically in the sort of metric, in the metaverse or whatever. It's you putting yourself, you're prioritizing yourself in the algorithm. So I think that that's a problem.
Yeah, but I think it's a big problem that intuitively people like you would reflect the nuanced thoughts and ideas. You don't have the skills to get a huge following, and people with the skills to get huge following not every time have very good ideas sometimes, but more seldom than maybe should hope for. So that's a problem, I think. But yeah, it was interesting to talk to you. Maybe the conversation strayed off a bit, but
that's good.
We should talk more. We South and North, and I really have to. I felt really ashamed when you said it. Come rescue us. I, first of all, I'm a drug addict living with my mom. I can't rescue anyone but myself, so I have no authority on that. But just the sentiment I felt, and I know a lot about shame being a drug addict and gone through all of that, being singled out for all kinds of reasons. But I really felt when you said it, wow, is that feelings we can arouse in you people down there?
But you have to also, that's something we have to grapple with as well. And there's something that needs to be spoken about is dealing with those uncomfortable feelings. It's a good thing that we're moving towards, and I really do feel like the culture is moving towards having these uncomfortable conversations. I mean, I could very well have not said that and just thought it, but, it's taken me my whole life to be comfortable with actually calling people out as it comes, as I'm feeling this. So that I'm not sitting with this uncomfortable feeling, but I think everybody needs to have these uncomfortable conversations for there to be progress. And I don't necessarily think you as a person was wanting to save it, but like it maybe hadn't even occurred to you because it's not your lived reality. It's not something that, I guess, I don't know what it's like to be a Norwegian. I don't know how much you engage with this kind of these kinds of feelings or rhetorics or whatever.
No, I didn't want to cut you down for saying it. I just found my feeling reacting to it was interesting. I was like, as I said, I don't want to belabor this point, but as a drug addict, I've experienced a lot of shame in my life. But so I recognized the feeling. And when you said like, you guys gonna come rescue us, like, oh, that didn't feel very good.
That's an old feeling, yeah.
It doesn't mean it was a bad thing for you to call me out on it. But on the other side, maybe a Black South African person listening to this can jump in the chair and say, who's she, the white girl, to say we don't need this guy's help because I need $50 from him, and if he's willing to give it to me. She's sitting behind gated community and saying she doesn't want patronizing to give me anything. So,
and also, I mean, here I am, like, I often feel like I can't speak for South African because I am white, or like that it's not my narrative. But at the same time, I am speaking, So,
I think it's good that you say what you think. Don't less self-censorship. I think it's a good thing, and at least when it comes to emotions and more like reflective thoughts, and maybe more self-censorship when it comes to just spewing out information, links, and I don't know. I have to work on that formulation. Yes, very nice to talk to you. So let's have a loose appointment, talking in a month's time or something like that, and get an update, and maybe our different feelings have matured, and we can see if we can delve any deeper into one or more of these topics when the situation evolved.
Sure, yeah. I enjoyed the conversation, so keep going.
And if there are any other people in South Africa in your network, or you think it's very important to talk to, for us here in Norway and Europe to listen to what they have to say, please let me know. I will contact them.
Sure, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Have a nice evening.
Bye, Stella.
Bye.